Hello everyone. This video talks about one of the most important model in the software development lifecycle models, which is the spiral model. Spiral model is an iterative model in the software development process, and the major important part or the major important role of this model is to analyze the risk which is involved in the at the each phase of the project. So at the each development phase, there is obviously certain involved whenever we develop any project. So the main idea or the main goal of the spiral model is to identify the risk and to solve them, so that obviously we can have a more better version of the software being developed. And it combines the iterative as well as the prototype nature of the model of the software development models that you have studied so far. So for instance, you have studied the waterfall model, you have studied the prototype model. We'll see that this model uses the approach, or it extracts the features of both the iterative as well as the prototype model, and it uses the features in itself. So we'll be looking at these things also, that how it combines the iterative nature of the prototype model and obviously the sequential steps involved in the waterfall model. And this model was developed by Barry Boehm, who was a very famous person who developed many models in the software development. So one such model was this spiral model. He also developed the Kokomo model. His major contribution was also involved in developing the Kokomo model, which you will be studying later in this subject. So the spiral model, if you see the diagram related to the spiral model, you will see that the diagram involves various let's say the loops. So there are many spirals or the loops you can see here. That's why the name is spiral, pretty much self-implied. So multiple loops are there as we talk about the spiral model. And the entire loops are divided into four quadrants. So you see the first quadrant, second quadrant, the third quadrant, as well as the fourth quadrant here. So we have this fourth quadrant here, and each quadrant has certain step defined. So like the first quadrant helps in object determination and identifying the alternative solutions. So this means in the first quadrant, we determine the objectives and the alternative solutions for any problem. So the first quadrant involves requirement gathering as well as defining the objectives, and then once we have all the objectives, we look for these alternative solutions for that, so that we can obviously select the best possible solution and move forward with that. The second quadrant talks about identifying and resolving the risk, which is one of the major crucial factor when we talk about the spiral model. One of the most important property of the spiral model is analyzing the risk. So analyzing the risk means you have multiple solutions with you. You need to select the best possible solution at a given point of time. So for that, what we do, we start building the prototype. So in the second phase, you start building the prototype, so that by the end of this quadrant, we have a prototype is built for a possible solution. So in the second quadrant, we look for the prototype. The third quadrant talks about developing the next version of the product. So in this third quadrant, what we do, we identify and develop the features which are required for our software. So we do the developing part, we verify the development with the help of testing. So the development and testing starts in this third phase. And then we move to the fourth phase, in which we review and we plan for our next phase. So the customers, they review what all the progress, the customer or the client, it reviews what all progress has been done at this point of time, and the planning of next phase start. So in detail, if I show you the steps, so this is the spiral model, in which in each of the quadrant, you see the steps are already listed here. So first, second, third and fourth, you see the steps already listed here. So the first phase, which says determining the objectives, So you see the requirement planning is written here. So that means you are in the first phase planning the requirements. You are gathering the requirements from the customer. The objectives are identified, they are elaborated and analyzed at the start of the every phase. Then the alternative possible solutions for the phase are proposed in this quadrant. And similarly in the second quadrant, as I mentioned, that all the solutions are evaluated here to develop and come up with the best possible solution, and then the risk associated with that solution is also identified. And how we identify the risk and how we select which model to go for, by building the prototype. So you see here, first prototype 1 is being built, next prototype 2, then finally at the end we have the operational prototype with us. So as these spirals are moving, okay, you can see the progress also associated with that. So you see, after one spiral, let's say the spiral starts from here at this point to, and then it goes and then it completes at this point. So one spiral is being done. So you see the progress that is being made. So next spiral, as soon as the next spiral starts, so obviously the next set of let's say a more high level design, a more high level progress is being done. So at each spiral, after each spiral, the progress is being done more and more in the software. So the first phase we have the prototype 1, next we have next a better prototype, a more developed, a more refined prototype, and then we have the operation prototype. So the spiral, we don't have a particular count of how many spirals we are going to use. So there is no specific count of how many loops will be using in our project. It depends from project to project. Certain projects might have, let's say, a spiral of length 7, some might have a spiral of length, let's say, 10. So it depends on from one project to another project, that how much number of spirals would be there. And similarly in the third quadrant, if you see, in the third quadrant we develop, what we do, we use the development, we use the testing phase. So you see the phases here, the designing phase, the coding phase, integration, testing, implementation. You see here the verification and validation being done, then drafting is being done in the second phase. So basically, as you are moving towards the next spiral, more and more development is being done. So earlier we have a basic let's say a draft version of the a draft design with us, and then as we are moving, we are having a more detailed design with us, more coding, integration, testing. And if we have more loops, if I add one more loop here, so maybe the detailed testing might be there, some more rigorous testing methods would be there. So basically the third quadrant talks about your development and testing part. And finally, we have the fourth quadrant, in which the planning is done. The customers evaluate the so far developed version of the software, so that in the end, planning for the next phase can start. So you see a review is also listed here, because then after at the first scope you determine the objective, and once the objectives are being determined, what we do the review process. So review is being done continuously. So in the next phase, the review of the software, the project will be done. And as you see this figure, the second figure, two important things are being listed there. This figure is also the same as I have just shown you. The only difference, or let's say the only extra parameter being added to this figure, is this cost and the progress. So basically you can see the arrow listed here. So as we are moving from one spiral to another spiral, the software project is getting in progress, is progressing more and more. So as you are moving the spiral, so you see here, so as you are moving through these spirals, the software is progressing more and more. So the spirals, it denotes the progress. And you see the cost here. So this angular line, we represent, usually say this, the angular dimension of this diagram. So the radial dimension, the radius, if you see here, the radius is increasing. So this radial dimension, or let's say the angular dimension, it represents the cost of the project. So as you are moving, again, more and more the radius is increasing, the more and more the cost of the project would be increasing. So this represents the cost. Rest everything is same in this figure also. So you might see multiple figures related to the spiral model, each explaining these concepts only in detail. So this is the, you can say, in-depth explanation of all the phases. Mostly there are four phases involved in the spiral model. There is also one concept that usually we say that spiral model is called as the meta model. So in the introduction, I told that the spiral model uses the concept of, let's say, the waterfall model, the prototype model. So that's why it is called as the meta model. So meta model means that it uses the features of all the soft SDLC models that we have studied so far. So for instance, you have studied the waterfall model, the iterative nature of the waterfall model, right? So the iterative nature can be represented by these loops here. So you are seeing these loops. This loop represents nothing but the iterative steps that are being involved in the waterfall model. So if you see the waterfall model, we have the steps, we have the development step, you have the first you gather the requirement, then you do the design, then coding, then development, maintain, testing, maintenance. So as the let's say the iterative nature, as the sequentially as the steps are being increasing, the more and more progress is being made. So this iteration that you see in the waterfall model is being represented in these spirals, in these loops of the spiral model. So that's how it uses the features of the waterfall model, right? And then we have the prototype model. You studied the prototype model also, where we develop the prototypes. So you see here the prototype 1, 2, 3. So these prototypes are being developed. So obviously the prototype model is also being used in your spiral model. And we can also say that the spiral model can be considered as supporting the evolutionary model, because again the iterations along the spiral can be considered as evolutionary level. So that means it uses the concepts of all the SDLC models that we have studied so far. That's why it is called as the meta model. And if finally, if I look at some examples of the spiral model, so let's say the first example is, you can use spiral model whenever you plan to develop any new product. Let's say any new product development is there, where there is lots of uncertainty that what will be the end outcome, what will be the end output. So whenever there is uncertainty, you need multiple iterations, let's say, to access the risk that is involved in this new product. Then you can use the spiral model. Or let's say some large scale system, let's say you plan to develop an operating system. So some large scale softwares that you plan to develop, like any new operating system or enterprise software, where you don't know that, let's say, what unknown changes might be there. There also uncertainty is being involved. There is risk associated in developing the large scale systems. The people can go with the spiral model. Similarly, the projects. So in research projects, let's say the end goal might not be clear. So we can maybe use the spiral, like each spiral can be used to explore the different hypotheses involved in your research, and the feedback can shape the direction of the subsequent spirals. So there you can use the spiral model in the research projects. And finally, some mission critical applications, where let's say the failure rate is you can't afford a failure, it might have very large consequences. So for example, in medical domain, like you can't expect a failure in the medical domain. So there also, to continuously access and address the risk involved in these mission critical applications, we can use the spiral model. So this was all about the spiral model.